All right, I'm on. So software updates by example. So thank you, Cameron.
All right.
Everybody have a good day, everyone that's left. Are you sad that you didn't go get whiskey? Yeah. I'm sorry, I've got no whiskey. I've got some waters up here. I'll give them to you if you're actually thirsty. So that was me. You can see that on the slide up there. So we'll get into it real quick here. A little bit more about me. Some of you may or may not have heard me before. In the vein of Star Wars, lots of little Star Wars pieces in here. I'm a principal consultant. 15 plus years I was staring at that. I've been in IT for longer than that, so my wife will testify how much gray hair I have, and I'll blame it on her, but I know it's not her. It is the job at times, and it is our wonderful users. Everyone love our wonderful users? And so software updates definitely crosses the line into the wonderful users. I blog, I'm on the forums. I've actually started looking at Reddit lately, so lots of different places to find me to try to get my 2 cents on things, and sometimes it's 5 cents, and sometimes it's not even a penny, but you know, you get what you get. Okay, so what are we going to talk about here? One of the things that I normally do in a lot of my sessions is point out bad things that people do, or problems with the product, and I don't always give solutions, because sometimes there aren't great solutions. I try to, right? That's part of it. You don't always want to be the naysayer. So this session is a little more focused on this is how we do things. Now along the way I'm still going to point out some bad things. I'm still going to point out, hey, this is a problem in the product, a couple of those things that are in there, or these are gotchas. But I really wanted to walk through, hey, this is how we do it, or this is how I do it. That's really one of the key points here, because at the end of the day, software updates for you is probably not software updates for the person sitting next to you. For the company that you used to be at, for the company you're going to, you know, whatever scenario that you actually want to put out there. So first thing we got to establish a baseline of terminology. It's one of the things I find most common in software updates is people say things, they say things way loosely. I'm very exact when I talk about these things, because if you don't say it exactly, then people don't know what you actually mean. So people say SCOM when they mean SCCM sometimes. I've seen it on the forums constantly. I see SCM when they actually meant SCCM, right? Just an example of being exact, because there's a difference if you don't really know what you're talking about. And there's no way for the receiver to know those kinds of things, right? So we got to go over terminology. What are the challenges, right? We've all seen them, so we'll talk about some of those. And then we'll actually go through the examples. So hopefully we won't spend too much time in slides here. And I have a few build slides. I won't call them animations, but they're definitely build slides. So we start out with the update catalog that we all know and love. Comes out every Patch Tuesday, right? Everyone knows that one. It's actually not true, right? Especially now with Windows 10. Previously, it was every Patch Tuesday, right? The second Tuesday of every month, as well as the fourth Tuesday of every month, they would update this, as well as on demand, right? So we had 0 days. We all love our 0 days. The 0 days would come out and they would still update the catalog. There's still other things in the catalog like endpoint protection definitions. So they really update it a lot more frequently, potentially every day. In general, most organizations only care about Patch Tuesday, right, that second Tuesday. So we can generally think about the update catalog being updated there. With Windows 10, how many of y'all are doing Windows 10 right now? Everyone, at least everyone's dabbled with it a little bit, right? They haven't really stuck to Patch Tuesday at all. I think you all have seen that, hopefully. And of course, if you're on Insider Preview, those just come fast and furious. But even on CB and CBB, they just kind of come out at random times whenever they feel like that patch is ready. So that's kind of a new thing that most enterprises are going to need to get used to. Once again, though, we'll go back to that Patch Tuesday. It's worked well for, what, 10 years? I don't know how long it's been. And I think most organizations will and should stick to that set schedule. So what's in the update catalog? We have updates, right? Big wow there. But what really is an update? There's 2 pieces that are key for Config Manager that are part of an update. We have the metadata, right? Things like, this is the KB number. Things like, where can we download the binary from? Things like, this update is applicable to these systems for this reason, and this is the detection logic, right? All that stuff about the update itself. It's not the update binary, though. It's a key difference, and it's very key within Config Manager. You have to make the distinction between these two. Now, ultimately, they're kind of both contained in the update catalog, because it has where the binary is downloaded from. But you have to make that distinction. The reason why is because once we actually get into Config Manager, we have some objects that Config Manager uses to handle these. We have the update group, right? Exactly like it sounds. It's a grouping of updates. But it has nothing to do with the binaries themselves. It is simply the metadata about those updates. Those get put into the group. The binaries, on the other hand, get put into a package. Just like all of our other source files for all of our other packages, our applications, our images, drivers, all of those good things, they always get put into a package. That's where the binary goes. So we'll finish the build here in a second, but notice there's no line between those two last objects. There is no connection whatsoever between those last two objects. We can have as many update groups as we want, and we don't have to have any binaries at all. We can have 3 update groups and 1 package that has all of the binaries for that 1 package spread out among them. Doesn't matter. At the end of the day, the client will pull the binary from whatever package it wants to. It doesn't care what package the binary is in, regardless of the update group. No relationship, no connection. Hopefully I've got that one through. And then, of course, we have the deployment. Now, the deployment really, I guess I should have taken that bottom arrow off. Because, like I just said, the deployment doesn't specify a package in any way. The deployment simply says, hey, client, these updates defined by this metadata in this update group are now applicable to you, or assigned to you is really the better word to use here. And it doesn't tell it what package to get it from. It's up to the client to say, hey, I need this update at the end of the day. He goes and asks the MP, hey, I need this update. The MP says, oh, here's a package that has that update in it. And really, it doesn't even say that. It says, here's the complete URL to that update. Because for a single update out of that package, I don't have to download that whole package. Right? I can download just a specific update out of that package. So that bottom arrow is a little bit deceptive there. Right? It almost should be an arrow going the other direction. So the deployment is the other object here, and I have another slide that shows that a little bit too, that assigns those updates based upon the metadata to the client. So real key to know some of those things. Like I said, I have another slide that kind of delineates what are config manager objects specifically. This is another key arrow that's in here, right? The update metadata, sometimes we call this the catalog because this is what WSUS downloads and makes available to config manager. The client actually knows about all of the update metadata. Doesn't matter what's actually deployed to it. Doesn't matter what's in an update group. He gets that update metadata directly from WSUS. No config manager intervention whatsoever. So that means he actually scans for compliance for every update that's in your update catalog. So for those of you that have been around for about the past 18 months, have seen lots of issues around this. Especially on Windows 7, there were lots of out-of-memory errors that related to this catalog getting bigger and bigger because the catalog has like 15 years of updates in it. And so Windows 7 32-bit systems were actually running out of memory because that update catalog was getting too big. So it's a key thing to remember. Every client will scan against every update that you have in your update catalog. Okay, a couple of noteworthy things to make sure that I actually covered them on the last slide. I kind of mentioned this first one, right? They're only going to install updates that are applicable to them and deployed to them. So the applicability is the compliance scan, which it does against every update, like I just mentioned. But they also have to be deployed. 2 pieces, relatively obvious, but it's always worth stating these, right, to make sure that no one's making any bad assumptions. And then the other one, I think I just drilled that one pretty home, right? Every update in that catalog. So make sure you're not picking things in your catalog, right, that you're never going to deploy in your environment. If you're never going to deploy SQL Server and you don't care about the compliance data, don't check it in your catalog. If you're not going to be deploying Itanium or Vista or XP or any of those things, don't check it in your catalog to minimize the size of your catalog. Now, there's other ways to reduce the size of your catalog. I doubt I'll have time to get into those, but just make sure that those are key points that you take away from this. So some challenges. I'm sure there are other challenges. Everyone has challenges, right? I could have put a user challenge on there. Maybe that would have been the biggest challenge of all of them, right? We all have those. But we have all of these. I'm not going to really read through them all explicitly. You guys can all read that or grab the slides after the fact and read through them. But hopefully we will talk through all of these in some form or fashion. I should say each one of these words at some point, and we'll see if I get through them all. So kind of like calculus, right? Everyone take a calculus class in here at some point, hopefully, or at least know what calculus is, right? So how hard would calculus be if you didn't know addition or subtraction, right? Pretty hard, or multiplication, right? They're all foundational. You gotta build your way up to these kinds of things. Well, that's why the manual case is actually important. It's still useful. Some people still do full manual. I'm gonna go through and I'm gonna pick the updates I want, I'm gonna deploy them. So it's very useful to actually go through these examples of doing it the manual way, because there's lots of bits and bytes in here that if you just jump straight to automatic deployment rules, you will completely miss, and you won't understand what's actually going on under the covers. Kind of like calculus, right? If you try to jump to it, you would be lost right away. So that's what we're gonna do. I didn't want to show that. That's the next slide. So we're gonna hop into my 1511 demo environment. And the first thing we're gonna talk about are the collections and collection building. So I actually have a group here, or a folder really, of software updates. I don't know if I really need to zoom in on that, but I will. And I have subgroups. You don't really have to organize them this way if you don't want to, for sure. But it is nice. I like folders just to move things around, right? You're not gonna do RBA on these folders, so be aware of that. Right, your workstation admins will see the server folder, and your server admins will see the workstations folder if you've done RBA to that level. So they're not great for that, unfortunately, but I like to do it, at least initially, just to make sure I have everything separate, very clearly denoted. So we'll hop into the workstations first and look at our different collections. So in this one, I have 4 total collections. This is really about staging for the workstations, right? We're typically gonna have at least 2 collections for staging. We're gonna have our test. Everyone tests? Yes, yes. So, you know, and I think I've said this before, right? If you don't have a test environment, what you really don't have is a production environment, because you're just testing in your production environment, right? Same thing here, you're still testing. You're just testing on your production systems. And when they come back failed, well, hopefully you have a good reason for that. Let me go back in here. And then we have our production. Now, is 2 phases enough? I don't know, right? That's a question for you to answer. You need to sit down with those powers that be in your environment and define how many stages of testing, of deployment do we need to go through to actually know that this is sufficient for our environment. Do we need a test 1, a test 2? Do we need a test a lab, right? How many actually do we need to go through? Typically for workstations, you don't want to get too crazy with it, right? The bonquiqui, everyone know bonquiqui? Can I say that? You know, don't get crazy with it. You don't want to get too complicated with workstations. At the end of the day, they're workstations. You're going to break something, most likely, at some point, if you're in any big environment, but it's going to be relatively isolated, hopefully. Now, if you have really important stuff that are monitoring hearts, okay, right, treat those special for sure. And that's really where the other 2 collections come in. So, moral there, create collections for each one of those stages so that we can do different things and we can drop different systems into those collections. Now, notice the other 2 that we have here. We have our manual install, exactly like the name implies, right? We don't want to deploy anything to these guys required. This could be maybe the traders on the trading floor, because you want their machines patched, absolutely, but you don't want to necessarily dictate their schedule, because if they go offline, you just lost the company millions of dollars, right? Yeah, that's not a place I want to be in. But at the same time, if their machines aren't patched, you still may lose the company millions of dollars, right, if they're affected. So you got to get them there. And then there's the exclusions, right? These are guys you don't want to touch for nothing. You know, whatever reason, once again, heart-lung machines, right? If I lose the company millions of dollars, I'm alive, they're alive, we're all alive. If I destroy a heart-lung machine, yeah, somebody died, that's not a good scenario. So there's definitely, once again, other levels of this that you can put in there. But this is kind of a basic framework that you can then expand on. Now, what we can do, both in our production and our test, I should have it in here. There we go. Our membership rules, right? We just exclude the exclusions all the time. So we don't have to ever keep up with that. I don't have any other membership in here right now. Of course, you would drop the machines in here by other collections or by direct membership. Other collections or queries is definitely the preferred way. But in this case, we're just going to put the exclusions in there. So now we can drop things in exclusions and know they're never going to get patched. They're never going to be in this collection that is ultimately going to have our deployments targeted at it. And of course, I have that same rule on my test, because exclusions is exclusions, right? We don't want them ever to be patched. So ultimately, we have 3 collections left that we're going to target with our deployments. So that's workstations. That's one way to do it. this is not exclusive to workstations. We could do servers this way if we wanted to also. But the intent here is our test goes first. That's the main purpose of that collection. These are the guys that we do, that second week, maybe the third week of the month. And our production at some point after that. And maybe you have a production A and a production B and a production C, right, to just roll those through, or however you need to stage it in your environment. And then we have the manual install. That is, we're going to create the deployments that are not required. They're available. It's up to the end user or maybe some other person in that user's environment to actually initiate those updates on those systems. One way to do it, like I said, not exclusive to workstations. Another way we can do it is we get maintenance windows involved. So obviously a few more collections here. We still have our exclusions in our manual install here at the top, because we're still going to have that type of thing in our server environment or whatever scenario this is going to be applicable to. Now we have our production A and our production B. Well, in most server environments, you're probably going to have a lot more than that. You're going to have these servers depend on this, and these servers depend on that, and these servers can only be patched on this night because the application administrators did weird things, right? And you're going to have all these weird scenarios, and they're going to really need to be staged. And so you're probably going to have a production A, B, C, D, right? Who knows how many you're actually going to have. Depending upon how many levels of complexity you have in there or all those different time frames that the application administrators have defined. And of course, we still have our test. So test is really kind of a production A. At this point, it doesn't matter. It's just something that happens before all of the other ones. It's nice to denote it as test. Once again, maybe you have a lab environment in there too, and you're going to stage those all throughout. Now, if we're starting to have lots of collections there, we don't want to be creating lots and lots of deployments, lots of things to manage there. That's where maintenance windows comes in. So notice we have this other collection down here, and I know I didn't zoom in on that one, but I will zoom in on this one. And notice for the membership rules here that we actually include the test. We actually exclude the exclusions just like we did before, and we have our production A here, and if I scroll down, we'd have our production B, and we'd have our C and our D, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, so on down the line. So in this case, we would create one deployment at the end of the day that targeted our updates at this collection. Now, that's where maintenance windows actually come in. On each one of these, the A, the B, the test, and I don't think I have them created, but hopefully you've all created maintenance windows or know how to create them. We would go into each one of those collections in our maintenance windows here, and we would define the exact time that we want that set of systems to actually patch. So maybe our production A is on Saturday night, right? And our production B is on Sunday night, and then Monday night for C, and so forth, right? So we're actually controlling the scheduling with our maintenance windows and have one master deployment to worry about with our servers. So it's a different scenario, a little bit simpler, feels a little bit looser, like you don't have as much control, but in reality you have just as much control, and you may have a little bit more control because the maintenance window has an end time frame. That's why I typically call this the server scenario, because it has an end time frame. Whereas using maintenance windows for workstations, can you really guarantee that those workstations are going to be on during that maintenance window? And generally the answer is no. Depends upon your environment, right? So either scenario could be applicable, but kind of the two different ways to look at it. We can have multiple collections that have multiple deployments. Or we have one master, kind of it's a roll-up collection is what I like to typically call it, not really an official term. And we just create that one deployment, and then we control the time frames with maintenance windows. There's no one right answer here. You could have both scenarios in your environment, for sure. Once again, workstations and servers. Maybe there's some other hybrid ways of doing it. But these are kind of the two base scenarios that I typically implement in most environments. Okay, so how do we go through and do the update search? I think most people have probably done that. You've got this nice big library of updates. We'll see how fast my SQL Server is here. Not too bad after I re-indexed it. Right, we come up here and we create our search. Searches are nice. That's not what I want to do. Here we go, add criteria. So we can add all these different criteria. Now I'm going to contrast it with something I haven't talked about yet. You'll see when we get there, is the ADRs, the automatic deployment rules. They have a real limited set of searching. You can't really do a lot of knots. You can't really do a lot of those things. So this search criteria in general is a lot more powerful. That's why some people like doing it manually, because it's easier for them to hunt through their updates and find the specific updates that they want. So that, in that case, is really about the exclusions and the approvals. And when we talk about exclusions, we mean, I know I don't want to deploy IE11, which right now really is a bad thing to say, but there are organizations, unfortunately, that are saying it, right? But that's an update that appears in most people's catalogs. I don't want to deploy whatever, .NET Framework 4.5.2, right? Once again, probably a bad thing to say, but some people are doing it for whatever reason in their organization, and there are other updates, right? Kind of like Kent was talking about. Every Patch Tuesday comes out, there's always at least one problematic. Over the past 24 months, it's pretty safe to say there's been at least one problematic update every single month. And you're going to want to exclude that at least for some period of time. When you do the searches, it's easier for you to do that, and so it's an implicit approval and an exclusion mechanism. You're not having to worry about having things fall into there because it was automated that you didn't want to go out. And of course, always, once you come up with whatever criteria that you want, let's say you do product, always include superseded. We typically don't want to deploy the superseded updates. Always include those two at a bare minimum, and then update classification is another common one. Sometimes vendor if you're doing third-party updates. We're going to include all those. Obviously, these are kind of bogus criteria right now, but make sure that you actually save this criteria, save this search, because you're going to come back next month and do the exact same thing again. Right? You don't want to have to build this search again. You don't want to have to remember how I searched about it last month. Or really, you kind of want to delegate this off, right? You don't want to be the low man on the totem pole forever. You want to hopefully delegate it to someone. So if you've saved the search, when they open their console, that same search is going to be there, and they're going to be able to go in and do that. So let's pretend I've done that. I've picked out a bunch of updates, and I'll actually kind of go down that path. I'll just pick a random update here, because I'll pretend I searched for it. And I'm going to create my software update group. Now, I do things in stages. I don't pick deploy right away. Why don't I pick deploy right away? Because it gives you a false sense of something. And I'll click deploy on a Server 2012, and I'll zoom in here real quick. Notice it actually has my download settings, or my download package is really the one I want to point out in here. So the implication here, remember I said before, there's no connection between the update group and the update package. This kind of gives the implication that there is, because you're doing it all in one. It's definitely a false implication. That's why one of the reasons I don't like doing it that way. I like going in and creating my update group first. Why? Because then I can QC it once again, right? Because we don't want that update to go out that shouldn't be going out. And that's really a simple matter of clicking on this. It's not even a wizard, right? It's just a dialog box. We type in a name, it adds all those updates to an update group. So I have a handful of tests and random other update groups in here, a Windows 10, a Windows 7. From there, I go in and I do my next step, download, right? So my update group was the metadata that I was talking about before. Then we got to go and do our actual binary. So that's where we go to the download. We're going to create a package, and it's going to stuff all of those binaries into the package that then the client can pull from. And I can separate them out to how many ever packages that I want. Is it good to line up your update groups with your packages? Sometimes. Is it good to have one monolithic package? Generally, no. You don't want to have this one 10 gigabyte package. Config Manager, over the years, has gotten really good or a lot better at handling packages. But if it's a 10 gig package and some corruption happens, what do you have to do? You pretty much generally have to rebuild that package or kill it off your DPs and redeploy it. 10 gigs across anything but a very fast link is going to take a while. And even over a 100 meg link that you may have to a remote location, 10 gigs is still going to take a while, and your network team's not going to be very happy with you. So always separate, when I do these things manually, always separate them into those multiple steps. And finally, we can come and do our deploy. Now, if you go back to our different collection building, on the workstation side, I'm going to create a deployment for each one of those collections, for my test and my production, for the two that I had up there. And if I happen to have other ones, and I'm going to do one for the manual also, because the manual is going to be available, whereas my test and my production are going to be required. So I'm going to create 3 deployments in my simple scenario, which is generally actually applicable to most organizations. On the server side, I only have to create 1 deployment. Well, 2, right? I have to create the manual one, same scenario, and then I have to create 1 for my required. And the only difference between those really is the scheduling. Scheduling on the server side for what I had was controlled by the maintenance windows. Scheduling on the workstation side is controlled by the actual times I put into the deployment. So like I said, manual is still applicable. If you know what you're doing in here and you're comfortable with it, 15 minutes a month maybe, right? It doesn't actually take that long. And you kind of get all of those things, all of those challenges that I was talking about. The problem really is sometimes you don't want to worry about those things. Sometimes you have other responsibilities, right? So other things happen, or you want to delegate it to someone. You really want to automate it at the end of the day. So let's move on. We'll go to this slide here. This is the one I was talking about before. It really delineates the pieces that are actually part of Config Manager, right? We have our update group that's part of Config Manager. We have our deployment, and we have our update package. Those are the things in Config Manager that we have to worry about. Well, so happens, that's what our ADR, our automatic deployment rule, actually creates for us. I'll see it in the forums a lot. I'll see people talking about ADRs a lot. And they say, oh, my ADR failed to deploy my updates. Well, your ADR didn't really deploy your updates. Your ADR did these things. It created or it updated those 3 objects. And those objects are the ones that are responsible for getting those updates out to your clients. So if something's failing, it's most likely not your ADR. You need to go troubleshoot those objects. Make sure that your packages are on your DPs, right? That your deployment actually made it to your clients. That your update group has the updates in it that the ADR was supposed to put in it. So you need to know those steps, once again, right? The addition to the calculus. If you didn't know those things and you jumped right into an ADR, how are you going to troubleshoot those things underneath when you didn't even know that they existed? Okay, noteworthy. Use dedicated collections. I talked about that. I didn't say that one explicitly, but do it, right? Don't use if you have an all Windows 7 collection, don't use that one, right? That doesn't make sense generally to do that, and particularly on the server side, right? If I have an all server 2012 collection, you haven't delineated anything in that case. You can use it, but make sure you include it in your dedicated patch. So when things change on you, you don't have to change all of your deployments. Don't target every update at every system. That one kind of goes along with the update catalog one, but why do you deploy updates, Windows 7 updates, that you know aren't applicable to your Server 2012 systems, right? There's actually some additional overhead in there because now that system has to track additional information about that update, right? So a Server 2012 system shouldn't know anything about the Windows 7 updates. Now, should you go down to a real granular level and do a Windows 7 and a Windows 8? I generally just do a workstations and a servers, and then I kind of put the Office ones where they belong. But you can get a little more granular than that. Be at least somewhat granular. Don't target everything everywhere is what it comes down to. And then there's the 1,000 updates. Most people kind of know this one or have heard this one. This is really a UI limit, and this is per group. This isn't per package. This is per update group. You can actually break this through PowerShell, to my knowledge. You can definitely break it through WMI. But you don't want to. It's a bad thing. Performance will suffer greatly to do that. Okay, the mostly automated, the ADRs. And I was given not a lot of time. I think I have about 3 minutes left right now. Okay. Cameron's given me a total of 6 more minutes, so we will go through these really quick. So ADR scheduling, right? We have our update catalog. When does it get updated? Kind of like we're talking about. The official time is 10 a.m. Pacific, so Redmond time. So I guess that could be PST or PDT. That's when it typically gets updated when we're talking about Update Tuesday. So when do we want to update our catalog if that's what we're worried about? Well, we want to update it after that time. And we can't say the second Wednesday, right? Everyone knows that at least 2 to 3 times a year, or hopefully everyone knows, hopefully this isn't new, but if it is, at least 2 to 3 times a year, the second Wednesday occurs after or before the second Tuesday, right? It just depends upon what the first day of the month is and what day of the week it is. So you can't say the second Wednesday. It doesn't work that way. I've had a DCR in for that one forever, 5 years now. Hasn't changed yet, unfortunately, but one day, we'll cross our fingers. So you really want to set that one every second Tuesday, some offset from the 10 a.m. Pacific time. So for everyone here in the US, physically here in the US right now, we can do that, right? We can set 5 p.m. every second Tuesday. We can set 6 p.m. If you're in New Zealand, you can't, right? Because New Zealand, they're ahead of Pacific time. It's like 20 hours ahead of Pacific time. So 20 hours ahead of Pacific time is now the Wednesday after the second Tuesday, which isn't always the second Wednesday, right? So look at the calendar if you don't believe me on that one. It's true. So here in the US, it's pretty easy to do. Elsewhere, you're going to have to either run it manually. You're going to have to wait till the third Wednesday, right? Because the third Wednesday, of course, is after the second Tuesday. You're going to have to come up with some other way to do it. PowerShell, Orchestrator, there's lots of other ways to potentially get that one done. But you want to make it as an offset, and you want to make it relative to that update catalog. Because otherwise, you're not going to get anything new, right? Or if you ran it before the last catalog update, now you're still 30 days behind, right? You want to always orchestrate around that. Next are your ADR evaluation times. And let me actually put up some potential sample times here, right? Same thing, right? If we run our ADR every day, but we only update our catalog once a month, the ADR is not going to get anything new. The ADR itself needs to have criteria that evaluates so that we get new updates. But if we don't have new updates in the catalog, it's not going to work. So you want to make that also relative, ultimately, to when the catalog gets updated. So update your catalog, then run your ADRs. We have the same scenario here with ADR scheduling. Now you can actually set the ADRs to run as soon as the catalog syncs on Config Manager. I don't like doing that. I still like doing it as an offset. If you're in New Zealand, unfortunately, you don't have that option. If you're in Fiji, you don't have that option. So you'll have to come up with some other way to do it. But we'll do every second Tuesday, something like that, 10 p.m. And I don't do all of my ADRs at the same time, because if they happen to evaluate the same updates, they may try to download the same update at the same time, and I've seen weirdness with that. And why have them both try to download the same update at the same time? It doesn't make sense to do that. Then we also have our offset time. Right? These last two, within the ADR itself, they're actually offsets from when the ADR runs. So if we schedule our ADR to run at 10 p.m. and it finishes at like 10:11, for whatever reason it took it 11 minutes to run, and we put 38 hours, it's actually going to be 12:11, right? That's not a big deal in the grand scheme of things. Maybe our users will be like, ooh, what's 12:11? But at the end of the day, that's okay. And same with our deployment deadline. That's going to be an offset actually from the available time that we set in our ADR. There are limitations in ADRs. Let's hop into the demo environment real quick and run through an ADR as quick as I possibly can. So we will call this one test 2 for whatever reason. We will pick our collection in here. So ADRs are hard-coded to a collection. So now if we go back to, that was nice. Did my internet get cut? No. Yeah, I know. There we go. Nice and quick. Okay, so we still run into the same scenarios that we had before, depending upon what collections we have built in our environment, right? With our maintenance windows or having the multiple staging collections or multiple collections to control our staging. So we may end up having to create multiple ADRs to actually mirror that, because each ADR is going to be specific to a collection. So in our case, I will just choose the servers, patch servers. Now we can create new or use the same software update group, and that's this checkbox here at the bottom. Didn't get into that one a lot, shortness of time, unfortunately. And of course, no, I don't want to lock you. The screen resolution, there we go. Oh, one checkbox here at the bottom is an important one. Another kind of QC thing that I often recommend to folks is don't check this guy right here. Because once again, these are automatic things happening. What happens if IE11 gets into this group and you didn't want IE11 to go out? Don't enable them. Have that checkpoint for you to go in and manually check. So you can go back and just make sure, right? Once again, it's the RGE like Wally was talking about, the resume generator event. If you have the opportunity to QC something, go in and QC it, right? How long does it really take? 2 minutes. This is an easy one for you to actually do. So we'll go ahead and uncheck that guy. Always do the all messages on the detail level. Otherwise, you won't get messages for pending reboots. There's a report that talks about, I don't remember, compliance status, and one of them in there is about pending reboots for systems. If you don't do all messages, you don't get that message back. So you don't have that information in the report, which can be important, right, when you're monitoring what's going on. Here's the criteria that I was talking about before. It's a much more limited set, right? There's no way to put a not in here except for the title. If you want to do exclusions in here, it gets really painful. And so this is another reason that some people don't like doing ADRs, is because it's a little more difficult for them to figure out what updates they want every month. It's easier for them to go in manually and do that. There's ways to kind of game this and get it done. There's ways to potentially run the search via PowerShell. So that's kind of another main theme here. Make sure you know how to automate these things, and I'll give you a couple links here in a minute on that. Now, one thing I will point out in here, and I do have it on a slide, is we have our superseded in here. Oh, and I scrolled past it. There is your friend, the custom severity. So when you are doing, and I underlined the wrong one, don't do that. When you want to do exclusions and or approvals, custom severity is something you can customize on every single update. So if I want to exclude a certain specific update, once again, IE11, I can go in and set the custom severity on that update to something like low, I click custom severity and I say, hey, I want everything but low. And now I've just excluded every update that I've marked as low within the catalog, right? So it's an easy way to do exclusions. I can flip that around and do approvals and say, high is my approval, right? So that I can kind of do it both ways and say that, or not high, critical, right? Redefining obviously what the words are. We can't explicitly change what that word is in Config Manager, but we're redefining what we're using it for. So now unless I've marked an update as critical, meaning it's approved, then the ADR won't actually pick it up. So that's a way to actually mimic doing approvals. So we'll just leave it there. We'll go on. Here's our scheduling, right? Everyone a little bit familiar with that one. Actually, here's our scheduling. That was when the ADR actually runs. User experience, and in the interest of time, I will skip all this and go back to the slides. Unfortunately, lots of other little tidbits in the slide deck. So it's a trap. I talked about the first one a lot. The other one, oh yeah, I forgot to mention this one. Don't use these two things together, right? If I use these two things together, if a machine comes online, if an administrator decides to uninstall an update, there's various other scenarios. OSD is another one of those. These updates won't ever get deployed, right? Because I'm only looking at the last 30 days where machines actually, or if I'm using 30 days for my date release required, right? I'm only looking at the last 30 days where machines required an update. Well, if I'm beyond the 30 days that an update was actually released, and all of a sudden somebody requires that update, it's not going to fall in there, right? So it's a bad thing to do. Use one or the other. I generally don't use required except for in very small environments where I want to make things completely hands-off. But don't use them both together because that is definitely a trap and you will miss updates. I actually did walk into a customer recently that had both of them. By the time I got done cleaning things up, there were well over, I got to think about it because they were doing both server and workstation. There were well over 200, there's at least 200 different updates that were required in their environment that were up to 3 and 4 years old because they had this criteria set. They had them both set together. So don't do it. Use one or the other. At least within your ADRs. Okay, I was going to demo this, but it's got a nice screenshot up there. Cleaning your updates up, right? We want to clean the packages up. Things get superseded, things get expired. It's a great right-click extension that Nikolaj created. Puts it right into the console for you. It'll clean everything straight up for you. It's a right-click. It'll clean up your update groups. It'll clean up your update packages. Right, it's not necessarily difficult to do these things, but if you can automate it, that's really what we want to get to at the end of the day. And I don't know why I hit escape there. For fuller automation, as you already saw, there we go. We can use Cortex tool. Cortex has a great tool out there. More or less, you create your update group, you right-click, it pairs it up with a template or as many templates as you want it to, multiple templates at a single time to create all those mini deployments in one fell swoop, automation. And then Steve Rahi, you all saw Steve out here. Steve actually has about 1.2 inches on me and about 50 pounds. Shh, don't tell him I said that. Oh yeah, damn. So anyway, Steve has a great blog on automating this process end-to-end using PowerShell, right? Doing approvals, doing exclusions, creating multiple deployments, creating the update groups, doing all these things. He goes through a great deal and explains everything that he does. He provides all the PowerShell scripts for you. And even if you don't like all of his philosophy around how he's doing his updates, you can still take his PowerShell scripts as an example. I have a set of PowerShell scripts I built based on his philosophy too that hopefully I will be releasing at some point that goes through and does exclusions, does all of these things for you. It's a handful of clicks I did for a customer recently. And it's really what it comes down to, right? Learn PowerShell. Who said it? Who was up first today? I don't even remember who was up first. It was learn PowerShell was the message, right? I think that kind of was a recurring theme here. How many of you haven't learned PowerShell yet? Anyone who about raised their hands? Yeah, you guys know that you need to. So, yeah, I didn't get a ton of time, unfortunately, but you can kind of see there's a lot of moving parts. Learn the moving parts. Learn how to add, learn how to subtract before you jump up to those higher levels of automation, right? Make sure you know the basics before you try to jump into the deep end there. There's no one specific way to do this either, right? One person's going to tell you one thing, one person's going to tell you something else. You know, it's kind of the same way with calculus. There's multiple different ways to attack problems or algebra or any of that, right? you can go about things in different ways. Learn the different ways, figure out which one meets your requirements. So that also kind of an implication there, define your requirements first. Before you even think about going and implementing these things, if you're coming from WSUS, don't say, I did it in WSUS this way, so I want to do it in Config Manager this way. That doesn't work, right? They work differently. Sit down, take a step back, define your requirements. Sit down with the business folks that have an interest. Get the business folks interested if they're not, because this is important stuff at the end of the day. We all know that. You want to have them on your side. Get them to at least look at what you're talking about. Define it, and then translate it into what Config Manager does, into one of these different strategies. And then automation, PowerShell, right? Use Orchestrator if you know Orchestrator. Definitely use PowerShell. Use any of the other automation tools at your hands, that you have available to you. Because at the end of the day, none of us want to be the George Jetson, right? I don't want to go to work and just click a button mindlessly every single day. That's just no fun. I want to automate it. That's fun. I want to just make it work and want everyone to sit back and go, hey, that was cool what you just did there, right? So learn it and absolutely use it. So 10 minutes over, 11 minutes over by that clock. And that was System Center Universe, at least as far as the sessions go. I think we have a close up. Thank you for your time. Definitely let us know how everything goes. Tweet me if you want follow-ups, and I know the decks are going to be online. There's my Twitter handle. Thanks, guys.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Jason. Appreciate it.